Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the April edition of the 2021 Digital Virtual Health Series here at Healthcare Innovation. I'm your host, Stephen McCollum, the Director of Programming here at Healthcare Innovation. Thank you all for joining us today. And of course, thank you to all of our sponsors. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors for this first session. They are OutSystems and Informatica. Program wouldn't have been possible without them, so thank you so much. And our first conversation today is focused on cloud. We're going to be talking all about cloud in healthcare, and it's going to be a really great one. I'm happy that we're able to start off the conversation today with this first kind of IT-focused conversation and additional conversations this afternoon on leading the IT workforce of the future, dealing with open source technology in healthcare, as well as what the CIO 2.0 looks like moving forward. So we have a great day of sessions lined up for us. To get us started, we have Richard Kramer, the Chief Healthcare Strategist with Informatica. Joining Richard, we have Ryan Smith, the Chief Information Officer and Vice President at Intermountain Healthcare. We also have Laurent Rodeval, who's the Senior Vice President of Strategic Technology Solutions and the Chief Information Officer at Cambia Health. And we also have Juan Ramirez with OutSystems. And then we've got Chris Cormody, who's the Senior Vice President of Information Services at UPMC. Great thing about this panel, we have someone in every time zone. Shout out to Laurent for joining us at 7 a.m. his time, Ryan's at 8 a.m., I'm at 9 a.m., everybody on the East Coast is 10 a.m., and now we're all here, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and ready to have a great conversation. So with that, I'm gonna turn my video off. Don't forget to ask your questions in the chat box. You can also ask your questions by using the hand raise function, and we can ask questions live. And again, that's how you ask your 2 questions, in the chat box or by using the hand raise function. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, sponsors. David, take it away.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm David Rath. I'm a senior contributing editor here at Healthcare Innovation. I think we're going to have a great panel discussion today. I wanted to start by going around and asking each of you to describe how your organization's cloud strategy kind of has intersected with the experience during the pandemic. And are there examples of ways it improved a health system's response, whether with telehealth or remote work or new care pathways? Or, and so I just wanted to, just a few brief observations from each person about that experience. Let me start with Chris from UPMC.
There we go. Had to unmute myself. Thanks, David, for having me and for the opportunity today. So, yeah, with the cloud being where it's at, and luckily and fortunate for UPMC, we had been somewhat of an early adopter and really pivoted very quickly when COVID hit. Over a weekend, we went from about maybe 5,000 or 6,000 remote users leveraging our collaboration platform, Office 365, to about 78,000, which really helped us keep moving forward during the uncertain times that COVID presented us. On the flip side, it helped us, the pandemic, one of the benefits of it helped us really drive the adoption of new technologies that we knew were valuable from a care perspective, which telemedicine, as you highlighted, was a very critical one. Very convenient. It just was a matter of getting patients and even our clinicians to adopt the technology as part of how they do their job, how they provide care. So we went from maybe about 600 cases per day to about 12,000. Over 2020, we saw 1.1 million patient visits via telemedicine. So pretty instrumental in how we were able to, again, quickly pivot and really accelerate the adoption of technology and how we provide care.
Great. Richard, how about with the clients you work with? What did you see during the past year?
Very similar example to what Chris described, right? Is we saw people who were prepared and were thinking about going cloud and going digital were really well positioned to respond to the needs of the pandemic. So for example, one of our customers was Valley Health. They're located in New Jersey, just outside of Manhattan. So they were hit, with the early wave of COVID. And because they were prepared with, cloud API integration, they were using Athena Health that has 250 APIs exposed. They were a Microsoft customer with Dynamics and Teams and Outlook. when they needed to put in place a telehealth solution similar to what Chris described, they were in the course of 2 weeks able to use APIs with these cloud applications to tie together and deploy a enterprise class telehealth system. And in the first month, they went from 5 telehealth visits to 12,000 telehealth visits, right? And that's really made possible because of the modern technology and the cloud solutions that are available. And I was talking with the 2 executives who put that solution together, and you know, would it be possible with standard HL7 messaging? No, it's API integration. I said, well, what about scalability? And they said, we didn't even think about scalability because they were all cloud solutions. They just inherently scale. And we think back and say, how much time would we have spent architecting for scale with a traditional solution?
Right.
And then to Chris's point again, they were brand new to using Microsoft Teams. And they went from 0 Teams users to 6,000 Teams users in 2 weeks. And look at any other rollout across an enterprise of Teams, and that would be a multi-year effort with lots of cajoling to try and get people to start using it. And they were able to get the entire enterprise using Teams in 2 weeks because of an urgent need to service their patients and keep their staff and their patients safe. So that's a testament, I think, to what's possible with cloud and modern integration technology.
Great. Lauren, let me go to you. Maybe you could just tell people just briefly about Cambia, in case people in the audience don't know what it's about.
Yes, no. So we are partner to OutSystems. We are a payer, Blue Cross Blue Shield payer in the Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Utah. We obviously had very similar experiences from a work from home and being able to pivot right away, literally in 48 hours, right? Thanks to our Teams backbone and Office 365. What I might add that hasn't been said is, we were able to do some really interesting things to go and identify members who were at risk. We not only had COVID-19 that blew up, but we also had massive wildfires in the Pacific Northwest that almost happened within 30 days of the work from home. And what the cloud allowed us to do, and particularly the products and applications, both at a workflow level, but also at a machine learning based AI standpoint, it allowed us to really run very quickly some symptom checkers, put symptom checkers in production within 2 weeks, available through our web and mobile app portals, and also allowed us to run member identification protocols so that we could actually proactively outreach to individuals who were at risk either for COVID or at risk for the wildfires, social determinants of health, et cetera. And so we were very excited. This would never have been possible for us to be able to make modifications to our internal routines to address this specific problem so quickly, without the agility, right, that some of the cloud native apps we had developed gave us. So very, very cool stuff.
Great. Ryan, let's turn to Intermountain. What was Intermountain's experience with the cloud during the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks, David. So, very much similar to what the others have said. We absolutely depended on the cloud, to help us rapidly scale. Like, Chris had mentioned, we also got an early start in telehealth services, 5-6 years ago. But the pandemic, just supersized the whole problem overnight. And so our challenge was just how could we, scale really rapidly and thank heavens for being in the cloud, because that's what allowed us, in a matter of days and weeks to really, tune those virtual care services, et cetera. Also, I'd suggest that, it was a big help in helping us to connect hospital inpatients, that were isolated to their family members and loved ones, which was really a big deal, because all the visitation policies, changed overnight. Cloud services were really key for helping us to distribute, COVID testing results to our patients. And like Chris had said as well, just rapidly scaling our remote work services for our employees and caregivers was really a big deal. We had, I think, probably a 10x increase in remote workers, leaving the offices, et cetera, and having to work from home. And we persist in that model largely today. And so just the ability to rapidly scale a lot of the, audio, video, collaboration kinds of solutions and other solutions, all cloud-based.
Great. And Juan, why don't you tell us real briefly what OutSystems does and your guys' experience during the pandemic?
Thank you, David, for having me here. So OutSystems is a cloud-based multi-experience rapid development platform. And our platform has allowed our customers to respond to the pandemic quickly by delivering, in a similar manner, COVID-related applications to help with a response, right? One great example is Humana. When the pandemic started, was able to deploy various applications to track the health of the employees, to manage their safe return to work on the office, the few that will go, and also to provide the customers the ability to find and schedule COVID-related tests right from their mobile device. So many examples around our customers to quickly pivot, and the cloud allow them to do that in a very quickly and efficient manner, right? Taking advantage of available cloud services for telehealth or AI and other things that they would like to do.
Great, thank you. Well, let's take a deeper dive now. Let me turn to Ryan again. Could you talk about your organization's cloud migration strategy, some of the flexibility or agility it's offered you, and like spinning up new environments for research maybe, or and maybe delve into how you think about the different flavors of cloud services: software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, et cetera.
Yeah, sure. So, we're in the process of pursuing a cloud-first philosophy at Intermountain Healthcare, but to be honest with you, that really translates to what I think our team would refer to as more of a cloud-appropriate approach, rather than willy-nilly saying everything goes into the cloud. We're really trying to focus on those workloads that we believe are appropriate for the cloud, and that's a mixed bag. There's some things that lend themselves very well to the cloud, and I think there's other things that still, due to a lot of vendor application architectures and the way our vendors deliver software to us, some things simply are just not cloud ready. Some examples there, our patient digital front door called My Health Plus. It's a cloud product that's really allowed us to rapidly scale up our direct to patient, direct to consumer kinds of services. And cloud has just been so key in being agile, being flexible, being able to quickly put up new services, and then to scale those to the appropriate number of users that we have come in. And again, the pandemic really was a clear business driver for why organizations want to be in the cloud, so you can rapidly scale. As far as your question around infrastructure as a service, PaaS, SaaS, I'm guessing virtually every healthcare organization today uses software as a service, where the third party, where the vendor really delivers its application via the cloud, typically through a browser or a mobile application. Some great examples of that, that we're all so familiar with would be, things like Workday or ServiceNow or maybe Salesforce.com Sales Cloud. And at the same time, PaaS services, these platform as a service, we really view that as delivering a framework where our developers can build upon to create custom applications, like we've done with our digital front door, My Health Plus, and our symptom checkers and other things like that, where our developers are using cloud services, but we can orchestrate and build upon those services in the cloud that the big tech vendors offer. And then infrastructure as a service, finally, we view that really as the bare metal kinds of services, where all of the hardware assets itself are provided in the cloud by a third-party provider, but each organization or client or customer is responsible for virtually all managing all the aspects from the OS to virtualization services to the storage, et cetera. So we view that as really more data center in the cloud.
Richard, let me turn to you. From your discussions with CIOs, what's been the biggest change that you hear in thinking about cloud adoption over the past few years? How are the conversations different than they would have been 5 years ago?
Well, they very much mirror what Ryan is describing, right? 5 years ago, I would say 50% of the healthcare organizations I would go out and speak to were cloud never or cloud reluctant. And in the last 18 to 24 months, there's none of those. I think most of the sophisticated organizations land where Ryan has, where it's cloud appropriate, right? There's some stuff that's not ready to move now, but SaaS applications have really grown to dominate, the ones that Ryan had mentioned. And so it's use cloud where it's appropriate, but we do see, right, from an integration perspective, and as Informatica, I see the world through a data management lens, it really is a multi-cloud world. And you're going to have multiple different SaaS applications. You're going to have potentially multiple platform as a service partners, and you're going to have potentially multiple infrastructure as a service. So it really is, how do I manage my data estate across this very distributed environment? And so that's really what we're seeing. But I can say with confidence, I don't run across a single healthcare organization now that says cloud never, even the most conservative. And I also think it's fair to say, the conventional wisdom is healthcare organizations tend to be 10 years behind the rest of industry and technology. That's no longer true, right? I think healthcare organizations are doing some of the more progressive and more innovative work, as Laurent was talking about, right? Doing real world predictive modeling and risk modeling and putting it in the hands of frontline workers and members and patients. So I don't think healthcare is behind at all, really, when it comes to cloud anymore.
Great. Laurent, from Cambia's perspective, what are some opportunities that cloud computing offers to start connecting with other organizations in your ecosystem, and maybe some business use cases that it might enable going forward?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think that's where the cloud is a real game changer. I think it's we tend to use the model. I think many use it, where you sort of look at systems of record, systems of engagement, systems of insight, and then of course systems of integration, right? And I think a key area, whether it's a health system or a payer, one of our challenges is engaging with our patients, with our members, and particularly helping them achieve as seamless and as frictionless and as intuitive an experience to access, the care they need, when they need it, where they are, at the most affordable rate. And when you look at our legacy systems, whether they're on premise or SaaS or cloud, they're not really designed necessarily to operate with each other, right? We talk about whatever it is, 6,000 hospitals, 800 health plans. I think last count was 240,000 physician offices across the US. And that's not even counting all the intermediaries and middlemen in this whole process. And very few of them are really designed for individuals. And I think this is where, when I look at where we're hitting the biggest ROI on cloud, and I think many have mentioned this on this panel, is it's not so much about moving an on-premise system and even refactoring it to the cloud. I mean, there's some advantages to that, but the real big game is actually to leverage this incredible innovation that's happening in places like Intermountain or UPMC or the 185,000 digital health apps, right? And the enormous amount of venture capital, which is basically investing in point solution digital health platforms that are all born on the cloud and cloud native. And the question is how do we select the best? How do we match the individual, with the best health solution that's capable, and how do we make it seamless and integrated and appropriate and apply AI? And so this is where we're putting all of our focus, right? Is leveraging. So all of our systems of engagement are all cloud native now. We've decommissioned everything that wasn't, and we're all about integrating the digital health platforms. Now, to your direct question, also, there's great work happening with open APIs, particularly the new CMS rules, the HL7 FHIR standards that have been put into as a requirement starting July 1 by CMS, whether it's for patient information, provider information, payer information, and particularly digitizing and making the what is already codified by the Office of Civil Rights and HIPAA rules as the individual rights to access to their records, right? Making that a machine readable, sort of retail comparable, accessible solution is the key. And we're right there on the threshold of empowering individuals to access their data directly, or potentially to empower a third party to do so on their behalf. And then that data liquidity, of course, now allows third parties to really innovate on the cloud as quickly as possible in ways that we were never able to do so before. And so I'm tremendously excited about that. And then also on the more traditional side of the business, organizations like Ryan's and mine can leverage what we call DaVinci HL7 Fire smart applications, which allow us
I thought Cambia was involved in the DaVinci project.
We are in the DaVinci project and the Karen Alliance, and very passionate about it. And actually, one of the first use cases that was applied, which is probably one of the biggest pain points for my colleagues on the provider side, is prior authorization. Right? I mean, that is probably the biggest complaint we get from our provider partners is the time it takes, the confusion, the misunderstanding, the complexity, and it's tremendous stress for providers, and it's even more stress, understandably, for the patient. And we've implemented actually with our partners in Portland, Oregon, the Oregon Health and Sciences University, OHSU, a real-time prior authorization use case, right, that allows not only OHSU and their providers to be able to get real-time prior authorization published into their Epic workflow, but also real-time updates to the mobile apps that Cambia/Regions provides to our members, so that they know the status of their prior authorization while they're there in the hospital, waiting for certain procedures or orders to be executed, et cetera. And that's a huge play, right? Huge play. It takes away, makes it touchless at real time, and eliminates this incredible anxiety and complexity that individuals feel.
That's great. Let me turn to Chris again. When I interviewed you in 2018 about UPMC's cloud strategy, you mentioned that 4 years earlier, the IT execs had decided that solely building out more data center space wouldn't fit the new vision of growth, which focused more on on-demand scalability. So could you talk a little bit about why that on-demand scalability was important to UPMC and some of the things it allows the organization to do?
Yeah, I think Ryan and Lauren actually spoke to some of that, David, in terms of being able to innovate and the acceleration to innovation. So our decision to not spend $100 million in capital to build a physical structure to hold a limited amount of systems and data, and really pivot towards this hybrid cloud approach that we've taken. And I love what Ryan said before about an appropriate cloud strategy. Some systems make sense to, some don't. In our case, and why we wanted that ability for exponential growth in the cloud is to innovate, and a lot of our focus is around the use of machine learning and translating that into artificial intelligence, and really helping garner better insights into how we provide patient care or how we serve our health plan members. And that's really been our journey. And I think we're at the cusp of some really amazing work as the technologies are improving and enhancing and enabling us to scale. We would never be able to do that, and we would have wasted so much resource, which is very limited in healthcare. We're not a software company by any means, and our profit margins aren't 50%. It's a very slim margin in healthcare, and those dollars have to be spent wisely. And geared towards how we improve and how we enhance how we deliver care to our patients or member services for our health plan and insurance members.
So what's happened to your data center footprint over the last couple of years?
It's basically has shrunk, to be honest. Two reasons of that. Number one is technology is getting smaller with flash storage. That's helped reduce that physical footprint, but we've seen that transition of, again, movement into the cloud on a lot of our new development. I think it's a well-known fact. A lot of the legacy applications and systems that we're all heavily dependent upon from a system of record perspective, I think they're referred to as electronic health records, really hold us back. And I think those organizations are struggling on how they're transitioning to the cloud. Now that said, we do it very cautiously, and we try to do it intelligently, especially when you talk about SaaS, the SaaS layer, those third-party applications that they come in as a shiny object, and our clinicians, our operation leadership is enthralled with them, but there's really not a strong security and talk about data protection and data governance. That's where our concern comes into. And that's something I would cautious everyone on, to to make sure you do the right due diligence, that you build the right language into your contracts. You try to get as much in liability coverage for your data going into someone else's possession, as well as trying to enforce things contractually to get them to adopt best practice frameworks like high trust and the NIST framework, which is a cost, but it's the right thing to do to demonstrate that that organization is doing everything they can to protect your institution's data. And I'm sure everyone on the panel here is seeing that there's continuing daily. You see these third-party solutions that are being compromised, that are getting hit with ransomware, and that's our data. That's our responsibility. It's my responsibility at UPMC is to protect our data, our digital assets, and that's where we have to do everything we can up front to protect our organizations as we make those migrations and moves into the cloud.
And Chris, one of the comments that you made was the pace of advancement of technology, right? And how the cloud allows you to keep up with that. I mean, I think we've all been doing this long enough. We remember when Hadoop was the thing, right? And not only did Hadoop come and go in less than 5 years, but very few healthcare organizations that I've seen ever got more further than a science project with Hadoop. And so one of the big advantages of the cloud is the advantage of just being able to keep pace with the underlying technologies and not having to staff up and try and make them successful. And you had mentioned that, and I didn't want it to go unnoticed that, that's a big advantage of just being able to keep up.
Absolutely. And another piece of that, which is, goes hand in hand, as you mentioned, it's the resources, it's our talent, keeping them educated, keeping them up to date on how to use these tools. So as much as the cloud offers this promiscuity, right? You can work in every cloud. The reality is you have to be somewhat smart about which clouds you operate into and you invest into to do your innovation, because the tools and the skill set, it is an investment in time and effort for our teams to do that. And again, we're limited and how we can approach things. So all great points.
I wanted to check in with Ryan on the same question about I'm curious about the data center footprint at Intermountain, whether it's shrinking or staying about the same size because of the cloud adoption.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's shrinking. It's a lot like, Chris mentioned, as we continue to put more and more services in the cloud, that physical data center footprint definitely, is shrinking over time.
Okay.
I would just add, I'm sorry, David, I'll just add to that, and I'm sure it's happening for Ryan, the data center is now becoming the network equipment center. That's where we're getting our connectivity, not just across our organization with all of our, UPMC, we have about 2,600 physical locations we have network connectivity going into, but out to the cloud, out to the internet, and being able to support that. So we're seeing that shift as well in terms of the actual gear that's in those facilities.
If I might add, it's interesting. There's a big focus on data center reduction, and we certainly are close to eliminating all of our mainframes. But what's interesting is that we've actually significantly expanded our application portfolio on the cloud. Right? There's back to my comments earlier about focusing on how do we engage with the people we serve, right? Whether they're members or patients. We have actually added a whole universe of cloud native products, applications, solutions, services that did not exist 5 years ago, right? And it's a whole new category, a whole new system. So I think there is no doubt that I dream of a day where, my application portfolio will be significantly lighter and all in the cloud, or at least SaaS based. But the greatest ROI we're getting is not from that reduction in that footprint. The greatest ROI is coming from these net new, born on the cloud, products, services, workflows, integration with our provider partners, smart on fire apps, et cetera, which are kind of a net new cost, I suppose. They're net new applications, net new technologies. You could argue more complexity, more line items on your APM, but they have the highest ROI, both at a member NPS or patient NPS, as well as a financial return.
Let me turn to Juan again. when I asked about the pandemic, and you mentioned some work with Humana, but could you give us maybe another example or dive a little deeper into some of the work you do with health system customers and some of the agility you see that this kind of work has allowed?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the cloud has allowed us to offer our platform as a service to allow our customers to just, focus on developing their applications and not have to manage and support all this underlying infrastructure. And most of our customers quickly realize value and benefits in a much shorter time because of that, right? They can start developing applications in a matter of hours and days instead of having to set up a whole life cycle of servers and and interconnect all of those and the software that they use to integrate all the development lifecycle pieces. We have a great example. It's a large medical device, Medtronic, that needed a way to kind of integrate like the Internet of Things. They develop and manufacture pacemakers for their for patients, and they needed a way to collect all that information in a timely manner. So they built these applications in our platform because traditional on-premise and legacy applications were too inflexible to do so, right? Now, this set of applications that they use have been able to, monitor, track patients' cardiac information or conditions in real time, but also has saved, about 35 years in clinical time so far, and has triaged over 500,000 of data transmissions from patients in 13 countries. So all of this is based to the cloud, right? The agility to of the cloud.
Great. One of the things I'd like to have a conversation about, maybe I'll start with Richard. One of the assumptions that a lot of people had that was the cloud is going to lead to considerable cost savings. And I'm wondering if that's always the case and whether people are maybe surprised sometimes that it's not this huge cost savings. Have you heard that from your talk with customers?
Comes up all the time, David. And I think that everybody has alluded to the genuine value of the cloud, right? We've heard from Chris and Ryan and Laurent and Juan that the real value of the cloud is innovation. The real value of the cloud is time to deploy. And that's the reason why the cloud is making such a huge difference. It's not saving money. And actually, I think under relatively few circumstances is the cloud cheaper than on-premise. I think that lots of people who are just starting their cloud journey think that one of the reasons to go to the cloud is cost savings and maybe total cost of ownership when you factor in not needing to have the staff and not needing to recruit and train and keep and all of those sorts of things. You can get to some savings for infrastructure as a service, but the real value is innovation.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I would totally agree with what Richard said. I think on a apples to apples comparison for doing things on-prem, the same workload versus in the cloud, net, it feels like the cloud is typically a bit more expensive. Okay, but Laurent summed it up really nicely. There are tools that are only available to us in the cloud these days, to be able to do work on certain workloads, et cetera, that are really innovative and can return tremendous business value. And it's worth that extra cost that oftentimes we incur as we make that shift to the cloud, just in terms of, again, business agility and business flexibility and scalability and access to some of these new tools is just, you can't get those in on-prem environments in many cases.
What I might add, a couple dimensions. One, the nice thing about the cloud is that it's fully controllable cost. So if for whatever reason something's not performing, or you're not getting the ROI you thought you were getting, or somehow whatever it may be, you can actually turn it off, right? Or you can ramp it down. When you have your own infrastructure, well, you kind of own it, and you might be depreciating it over 3-5+ years, right? And you're stuck with it. The other thing I find fabulous, and maybe I'm dating myself, but I recall the days when we would do projects, especially which were managed in a waterfall way, and we'd have like 12, 18-month timelines, And we'd spend at least a third, if not 60% of the capacity of the project, the mind share of the project, thinking about the infrastructure. How do we design the infrastructure? How do we design the hardware, the redundancy? I mean, massive amounts of investment and thought and mind share consumption by not only the technology team, but the business team. And today we spend no time thinking about that, right? I mean, it's 100% of that mind share is focused on solving real patient problems, member problems, business problems. And so it may look like the same cost, but you're actually getting 3x focus at minimum, right, on actually solving a business issue with significantly lower risk because you're outsourcing to world-class organizations, depending on who you pick, but most of them are very good, right? The infrastructure part, which none of our organizations were ever that good at anyways.
Yeah, Laurent, I had to laugh as you were describing that. In a prior life, I ran operations for UMass Memorial Healthcare. And when we would do a project, right, it's 90 days to provision the server.
That's right.
If you're really doing it well. And now, you spin up a new environment on Azure or AWS or Google in minutes.
That's exactly right.
Chris, I saw you speaking in another venue where you said that the cloud offers an opportunity for health systems to enhance their cybersecurity posture. Could you explain what you meant by that and maybe use UPMC as an example?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, David, I think I have to stop speaking at so many different places. But no, in reality, and it gets to the point that, the Microsofts, the AWSs, the Googles are spending billions of dollars on protecting and building out the tools to protect those environments. So that part of my statement is true, that they're going to spend a lot more money than I'm able to spend on investing on the type of tools and security provisioning that we can do on-prem. The second part of that, which I talked about a little bit earlier, is again the training aspect of it and learning how to use those tools effectively and configuring those environments correctly. So it's a different approach. It's different ways on how we do things to protect those environments. But I'd rather again run my new systems, that are innovative projects and programs, out of a environment that has those capabilities versus building it all on-prem. So it's just another, a plus versus a minus in terms of that decision-making process for when you're, where do you want to put that system, or where do you want to store your data? But again, it's not just like a, simple push. It's, knowing how to configure the environment. Again, building out your capabilities as an organization to make sure it's protected appropriately. Again, we're a big believer in high trust and are continually subscribing to that framework and approach to ensure that we're doing everything we can to address the risk management aspects of it, because it is a slightly different risk than running it on-prem.
And David, one of the things I'd add to the discussion so far, right, and we've talked about the growth of SaaS applications and innovation, what we're really experiencing is a dramatic increase in data sprawl. Right. And it's great that these applications are innovative, but from a management perspective, we've created a new obligation to really be aware of where all of our data is going and what it's being used for, and being able to monitor that. In the old days, there was a certain amount of comfort that it was all in my data center. And so, the fact that it may be on one server versus a different server might not have been so critical when it all lived in my data center. Well, now when it lives in a different vendor's SaaS app, there's an obligation as an organization to really be aware of that, to govern it, to monitor it, and that sort of thing. So it's created, I think, a new data management challenge with everything that we've talked about.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on that, like the data governance issues or data management challenges when you're working in, maybe you're working in a couple different cloud environments, or working with a lot of different vendors outside the four walls of your organization?
Yeah, David, I really like what Richard and Chris have both said about this. There's a lot of good that comes from a business value perspective as we move, workloads and data into the cloud. And like Richard said, it also opens up, a whole new set of challenges that we've got to be, just incredibly mindful and aware of, from a data governance perspective, knowing where all of that data sits, et cetera. And new thing that's kind of unique to cloud models is that anybody with a credit card, in essence, can provision a cloud service today. And whether that's a corporate purchasing card or anything else, policies aside. And so all of our organizations have to really be aware of that, because, back in the day when everything was confined within, the four walls of our own data centers, there is no way, end users and other workforce members outside of IT could provision up, a new application kind of a service. And now that's actually really easy to do. And so we have to really take kind of a people, process, technology approach to, educating people, really doing a lot of verification and auditing, monitoring, et cetera, to make sure that, just like Richard said, we're always aware every day of where that data resides and how it's being managed, how it's being governed.
Is there an important role for the partnership with the Chief Information Security Officer, working through those issues and making sure that that those are being followed at the department level?
Absolutely. CIOs and CISOs and digital officers, et cetera, almost need to be joined at the hip in today's world of cloud services.
And I would add, it's the entire organization. It's supply chain, it's legal, it's the operational or clinical leadership that has to be engaged. And I'm sure for Ryan's organization, we spend an incredible amount of time and effort trying to vet those solutions before we make that purchase, before someone uses their corporate credit card, which again, against policy to maybe acquire something. And a lot of times with, I think Juan brought up, the Internet of Things, you have all these operational technologies that are now being placed on our networks that are introducing risk that, again, our data is being generated and being stored and collected, somewhere else. And helping educate those purchasers within our organization to make sure they're aware that, there's implications to now buying a piece of equipment, because there is technology that's running it and that's dependent upon it. Some of our biggest challenges are with medical devices. As great as they are from a medical perspective, they're still running on older operating systems, and they're not updated and patched as frequently as we would like. So it requires us to create segmented virtual LANs on our network to keep those devices separate and secure from everything else. So there's definitely downstream implications to not engaging all the right stakeholders in an organization today.
But Chris, the intriguing part of what you're saying and everybody's saying, in the past, a very conservative IT organization, when presented with the challenges that have been described, the answer would be no. Right? And that's an unacceptable answer now, because they'll just go around us and do it themselves. And Laurent, to your point, it's where all the innovation is happening. And so the new obligation is not to say no, but it's to figure out how to actually do it, but do it without, unnecessary risk.
Absolutely. It's all risk driven.
I'll just add a comment to Chris's and the view. What's interesting also is that it's not just about your data, right? So the security function is extraordinarily important, right? Our ability, the concept of trust has always been important and a critical factor in our ability to perform, not to mention compete. Today, it's you either meet that bar or you don't. We've probably quadrupled the size of our information security team over the last few years. There's nothing we do without them. And they're not only at the back end, but by the way, they're at the front end of every single one of our sales engagements, with employers and provider system partnerships, et cetera. There's nothing we can do without information security at the center of everything we do, whether it's based on NIST or high trust or SOC or any of those models. And we embrace the same posture, Chris, that you've underlined. The other element, what's interesting is that it's not just about your data. We're deeply committed to serving people as individuals, right? And providing personalized, curated, focused services. Well, that implies very advanced AI, machine learning models, supervised learning. And that implies that very significant of the data that we're using to train our models is actually not our data. It's other third parties' data. And so we're finding that our exposure is not only the ability to protect our data internally, but more importantly, to protect the data that we're either being entrusted with, by other third party partners, or that we're buying or storing, et cetera. And so the scale of that challenge becomes enormous, right? And as you've pointed out, Richard, I mean, it's not a wish whether you'd like to do it or not. I mean, this is the only way to compete, and this is only the scale of this will get greater and greater.
Laurent, you spoke about some exciting use cases. The real-time prior authorization, for instance, is one, and you were just talking about personalization. Are there some other use cases that maybe take advantage of AI in the cloud for those personalized services that you're kind of excited about looking into the future that maybe we don't have yet, but we will in a couple of years?
Well, I think combining, and considering those of us who are on this panel on the provider and the payer side, I think the ability to parse unstructured data. I mean, just the extraordinary volumes of customer service calls, clinical case management calls, the PDFs with clinical financial information, consumer information that we might purchase or access from third parties outside of the traditional healthcare industry. And we've got these troves of structured and unstructured data and the ability to parse it. I mean, there's some great innovative services, coming from AWS, from Microsoft, from Google, et cetera, that allow you to do that, and then to create, quasi real time, insights at the point of workflow, right? So for us, the ability to augment our clinicians, our customer service professionals who are deeply empathetic, that are looking to have a very personal, thoughtful, caring relationship and contact with our members or our patients. How do we augment them? How do we make them as smart as possible? How do we ensure that they don't repeat questions that irritate the individual or distract the individual from the problem they're trying to solve at a deeply anxious moment in their lives? And so for us, AI is all about that, and there's a laundry list of services that are being experimented, right, or prototyped at this point. I wouldn't say they're necessarily all ready for production, but I think we're on the threshold of being able to publish insight, not only within our own internal workflows, whether it's case management or customer service or claims processing, but actually, as we touched on with Smart on Fire applications and Da Vinci use cases and others, we'll be able to actually publish insight at the workflow, for example, of our partners in the provider systems, whether it's in their Epic workflows or Cerner workflows or whatever it may be. And I think that's and by the way, that's not the future, right? I mean, we're actually already demonstrating these things in POCs. Now it's a question of my CTO likes to say it takes two to tango. So, now it's up to people like Chris and Ryan and I to kind of agree and say, okay, we're going to do it together and we're going to make it happen. And the technology's there.
Great. Chris, a few years ago, UPMC announced a partnership with Microsoft that involved AI and cloud innovations. Could you give us any detail about that work?
Yeah, we're heavy in the midst of doing a lot what Lauren just spoke about in terms of the unstructured text and data. We have one clinical system that was homegrown about 30 years ago at UPMC. We just surpassed 2.6 billion clinical records, and one of the projects we're working on right now is running that through Microsoft's text-based AI platform to translate that data into structured text and something that we can take action on. So that's one of the key aspects. The other aspect, again, similar themes you're going to hear, is bringing those insights at the point of care or in the workflow. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all real time, as Lauren correctly pointed out. Our clinicians tell us, the only real time event driven augmentation of their decision making process and supporting that clinical workflow is in the ED and in the ICU. Those are primarily the two key areas that we're focusing in on to take an event driven architecture that we're working on with Microsoft to bring that data, bring those insights that we don't have today. Some of our biggest challenges, again, is unlocking that data that's buried in these proprietary systems that I mentioned before that have been around for a long time and don't have the architectures today to help make that a little bit more seamless. So a lot of work being spent there and bringing together petabytes of data. And that's, again, speaks to the the opportunities in the cloud. Couldn't really do this on-prem from a processing, compute, and memory perspective, but we're able to do it in the cloud.
That's fascinating. I'm also always interested in how the public cloud can help researchers engage across health systems in big data projects. Do any of you guys have examples of the cloud kind of making that much easier than it used to be if you thought back a few years?
I mean, from my perspective, go ahead, Ryan. Sorry.
Well, yeah, sorry, Chris. I was just going to quickly say, yeah, we absolutely have done, cross-organization research projects with other organizations, and the cloud becomes an indispensable part, for how that analysis can be done across those data sets. It would be really challenging to do otherwise. So it's a key thing, David.
Chris, would you?
I would just add, I'm sorry, David. I would just add to that. Part of those research projects is there's a long-term data storage requirement associated with all those research studies. So the cloud definitely helps facilitate that, and it makes it easier to manage.
Great. I had one more question, kind of general. I was thinking we have representatives here from really big health systems, but I was wondering if the cloud offers possibilities to small community hospitals and health systems to deploy more sophisticated IT infrastructure than they would have otherwise, or are they still challenged to come up with the skill sets to manage that hybrid cloud environment? Anyone have a thought on that?
It was interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, certainly, when I look across our customers, it's very true that cloud and the technologies that we've talked about make, world-class enterprise scale infrastructure accessible to virtually anybody without regard to the sophistication, right? I mean, you look at UPMC and their sophistication. Same thing with Intermountain, same thing with Laurent's organization. They have really sophisticated, smart, and can afford to keep up with some of the leading technologies. Well, now a community hospital can buy the exact same service on Azure or AWS or GCP that the biggest players can have. And so I do think it's given a much broader ability for smaller organizations to innovate than they might otherwise have.
And I think, with the 21st Century Cures Act and interoperability rules, over the next year, we're going to see, I think, rampant innovation, coming to where we'll start to see much more democratization of semantic data layers and the ability to share that data across organizations that will allow increasingly these smaller, medium-sized organizations to fully participate in a lot of, what Richard just mentioned. And that's going to be a pretty key thing.
One answer to you, David, you mentioned COVID-19 at the beginning of this panel. I mean, behavioral health, of course, has exploded under COVID, and it was almost all independent individual physicians, right, who were running these, all over the states we serve. And there was practically 0% telehealth for that segment prior to COVID-19. That is actually one area that continues to be sustained at 60 to 70% telehealth. At this point, when we've seen a tapering off of telehealth and sort of the traditional, patient interactions on the behavioral health side, we don't see that changing. And what's extraordinary is the great majority of the providers are not part of large systems. So I think it's a great sort of proof point that the price point for these services is much lower than it's ever been in the past.
Now, one of the things, David, I would add to my earlier comment is that data science and the artificial intelligence and that sort of work, we do see happening in the larger, more sophisticated organizations that have, an academic or a research bent. But what we're also seeing is a willingness of the larger organizations to share those algorithms so that the smaller organizations can run them, right? So I think that the degree of collaboration that's happening because of the cloud is also unprecedented.
Great. Well, this has been a great conversation. I'm going to turn it back over to Stephen because we're coming up at the top of the hour to see if we have any questions from the audience and to wrap up.
Our audience has been, I think you guys shared so many great ideas that you've stunned our audience into silence because nobody has any questions this morning for you all. But I will say thank you all so much for kicking off the program today. This is a great conversation. There's so much going on with cloud. I appreciate all of you being here, especially LeRon getting in so early. And hey, it's the first time in a long time we've had a panel with somebody from every time zone in the US. So that's pretty cool. So that wraps up this session. Of course, these sessions will be available on demand as well if you want to watch them again or refer them to your colleagues. Don't forget to join us again at 12 p.m. for our next panel discussion, which is titled the Chief Information Officer 2.0, What's the Future of the CIO? And then at 2 o'clock, we've got our Power of Open in Healthcare conversation. And at 3 o'clock, we're wrapping up the program with your leading your IT workforce in the new healthcare environment discussion. Lots of great speakers coming up, lots of great leaders from industry and healthcare delivery networks. So we're very excited to have everyone here. Thank you again to OutSystems and Informatica for hosting or sponsoring this particular session. We appreciate your support. It wouldn't be possible without you. And of course, thank you to David, all of our panelists, and all of our participants. Y'all enjoy the rest of your morning, enjoy your break, and we'll see you back here at noon. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Thanks.